This is the second year they're in the desert. It's the first month of the second month, first day of the second month, and the Jews have to be counted. And they're setting up a formation to travel in the desert where you have 4 camps. Each camp is comprised of 3 tribes. And the second camp, the center camp, is called Machne Shechina. That's the camp of the Shechina. That is the Leviim, the Kohanim, the Leviim. And you have the Mishkan in the center. And you have the 4 camps encircling that center camp. And each camp is identified as that camp. And each tribe has a degel, has a flag. And the flag itself has a color. And the color of the flag is the same color as the colored stone on the choshen, on the breastplate, that was worn by the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, that was worn on the choshen. And each flag had a picture, and the picture was the picture which, when Yaakov had blessed his children, each one of the tribes were identified in a certain way, and that was the picture that was on the flag. So it was the color in the picture, and then so each individual tribe had an identification, and each group that was grouped together, groupings of 3, also had a flag, like Degel Machne Ruvain was called. The flag it was called Machne Ruvain, Machne Yehuda.
I thought it was groups of 4, Rabbi.
There were 4 groups. There were 12.
I thought there were 3 groups, 4 in each.
No, 4 groups. 4 groups, each one had 3. Okay? So I always say, in the name of the Maharal of Prague, that the difference between 4 and 5, 4 is always disconnect or dispersion. Because if you have 4 things in 4 corners, one has no relevance to the other. So what brings everything together? If you have a center point, the center point brings all sides together. So what coalesces, what unifies Klal Yisrael? The center. What's the center? The center is Machne Shechina. It's because we're all committed and believe in Hashem Echad. That is the center. So the 5 is the 5th Machne is the center one. Okay? That just conceptually speaking. Now, but why did they count them at this point? So over here, the Sefarnu explains, because we were meant to go into Eretz Yisrael, so you have to have a standing army in terms of the conquest. Unfortunately, because of the Meraglim, we were waylaid for 40 years. But that was the whole idea of counting them. They had to be counted because we're about to enter the battle. So we have to have a standing army. And this is what we mentioned, named Ramban. So here the counting, even to count them through a medium, that's only if it's for an objective. That's the Dvar Mitzvah. But just to know the number, even if you use a medium, that's not sufficient. That's why David, when he counted the Jews, since it was not for this objective or objective of mitzvah, therefore there was a plague which ensued as a result of that counting. Then we discussed this. So over here in Posuk Yudches, the Torah tells us, the whole congregation was assembled on the 1st of the second month. Vayisyaldu al mishpachosam leveis avosam. B'mispar shemos. B'ben ezru shana v'mal legugulosam. What does it mean? Vayisyaldu al mishpachosam. They brought the birth record of their family. So Rashi says, Heviu Sifrei Yuchuseim. They had brought their documents of pedigree, Ve'edi Cheskes Leidosam, and testimony regarding their birth. Kol echad ve'echad l'shiachis el l'shevet. Each one to be identified with his own tribe. Because now we're identifying the people, we're setting up the camps and the tribes individually, and therefore they had to bring their Sefer Yuchuseim. Okay? The way I'm explaining right now, that's the way the Ramban learns. The reason why they had to bring that books of pedigree, they have doctrines of pedigree, is for this reason. However, if you take a look in the Midrash, that the Gemara tells us that before HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael, he offered it to the nations of the world. And each one turned it down for his reason. And he asked the question, could you imagine God coming to each nation says, do you want to accept my Torah? So if Hashem is offering it, is there a question? Of course you want to accept it. But they asked the question, could you tell us what it's all about? And Hashem says to Edom, to Edomites, it says in my Torah, lo tirtzach. You're not permitted to commit murder. They said, sorry, doesn't conform with our lifestyle, because we have a blessing from our forefather, achar b'chotichya. We live by the sword. So therefore, it doesn't really conform. And he went to each one of them, each one rejected it for his reason. They come to Klal Yisrael, and we say, Nasa v'nishma. We accept unequivocally, just tell us what to do. That was Klal Yisrael's response. And the Gemara says in Shabbos, when we said Nasa v'nishma, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Mi gilo razeh labanai. Who revealed the secret to my children? They speak like angels. Just as an angel, he's ready to do regardless what Hashem gives, whatever the order may be. Identically, we took on the profile of angels. We're ready, except unequivocally. We're just waiting for the charge. Whatever the order is, we do the order. That's the Gemara in Avodah Zorah and the Gemara Shabbos. The Medrash says that after HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael, the nations of the world came with a complaint. What are you offering to them? Why don't you give it to us? You should have given to us. You're playing favorites. So Hashem says to them, could you prove your pedigree? My children proved their pedigree, that they're purebreds. You people, you're all issues of adultery and incest and everything else. And therefore, you people, you don't meet the grade. Klal Yisrael makes the grade, you people don't make the grade. Therefore, you have no relevance to Torah. Therefore, you weren't even a consideration, to be considered, to be given my Torah. Now over here, the Sefarno explains why did they have to bring the books of pedigree. If you take a look in the Sefarno, if you have Mikros Gedol's Chumash, what was the objective of this counting? To see if there were those who were eligible to go to war. So the intent was to maintain the pedigree. You hear this? When you go to war, you need plenty of schus avos. Your own merit is not sufficient. You have to really draw up much schus of the past. Of our omru, the quotes of Gemara Kedushin, a bodkin acha mishenichta b'strati shel melech. A person who's inscripted into the army of the king, his pedigree didn't have to be checked, because if he was qualified and he's enlisted in the army, that means his pedigree was checked out. So there's never a question of his illegitimate, that he may be illegitimate. Listen to this. Because the Shechina only is associated with the families that have the pedigree. So therefore, when you go to war, you need a Shechina with you. And if Shechina is not with you, chas v'sholom, they have a problem. So therefore, the only ones who were conscripted, they had to prove their pedigree. So therefore, if you were conscripted, and then there's a question of your yichus, of your pedigree, there was never a question. Because they couldn't have been enlisted initially unless their pedigree was previously checked. Because again, he says, because when you go to war, it's chus avosam misayosam, only the chus of your forefathers assist you. In addition, the Shechina only dwells among the Mishpachos and Michosas b'Yisrael. Okay, now, according to this, if the whole concept of Kabbalah Torah was what? Was we should cleave to him. We should be his people. That means have a relationship with the Shekhinah. What happened at Sinai? We became a Goy Kodosh. We're called the holy people. Now, how do we become holy? Har Sinai. Why was Har Sinai, when the Shekhinah, when the divine presence descended on the mountain, why was the mountain holy? Because of Hashem's association with the mountain. What happened when the Shekhinah, when the divine presence ascended from the mountain? It's an ordinary piece of rock. And they were able to approach the mountain. So why is Klal Yisrael Goy Kodosh? We're Goy Kodosh because God is inextricably connected to us. That's the basis for our Kedusha. But if we say Ein Shechina Shoreh, the Shechina only has relevance to only families that have a pure pedigree. But if there's illegitimacy, it has no relevance to them. Therefore, automatically, the nations of the world, which were all products of incest and adultery, which they're lacking in their pedigree, therefore, they can't be the chosen people. Because the chosen people means God has a relationship with them, where his presence dwells in the midst. Now, why, if a person has illegitimacy in his pedigree, he's not pure, why doesn't the Shekhinah have relevance to him? To that person, to that family? What's the reason? Now, we read in Kedoshim, Kedoshim tiyu ki kodesh anei Hashem Elokechem. I want you to be holy because I'm holy. So the Ramban over there explains, so firstly, Rashi learns, whenever we find separating from Arayos, that establishes Kedusha. We never cross those lines of incestuous relationships, and therefore the Torah goes and delineates all the various relationships which are permitted and not permitted. Kedusha is what? Those lines were never crossed. The Ramban adds, in addition, to intensify the Kedusha, you have to win yourself even from something that's permitted. Because just as Hashem is unrelated and disconnected from the physical, so the more we reflect his profile, that we have less relevance to the physical, the bond is a stronger bond with Hashem. But basic, as Rashi says, whenever we're porshim in arayos, there's Kedusha. Separating self from forbidden relationships is Kedusha. Why? Now, a person naturally, a man and woman, they're attracted to one another, the way Hashem created the world. Gemara says that unless God created this attraction, you understand, a person will not procreate. He would not be interested in a woman. So God created this attraction, man and woman. Now, if a man is naturally attracted, so now what man was endowed with free choice. The only species in existence that is able to make a choice despite the inclination is only the human being, because every other living creature, species, its function is instinct. It behaves the way it behaves because God programmed into its DNA a certain instinctive behavior, and based on that instinct, that's the way that species functions. Whether it's the insect, whether it's the reptile, whether it's the fish, whether it's the animal, the domestic, the human being is the only species that is able to override, to suppress, or to override that instinct. There's a certain inertia, you could overcome that, you could override that. There's a certain desire, you could suppress it. So what is Bechira? Bechira is to do what you want to do or to do what you're not supposed to do. Free choice is not to do what you're inclined to do. It's to suppress or to override what you don't want to do. That's what Bechira is. So Bechira, free choice, was given to man that he should be, as the Ramchal explains, the only one in existence who does as he wants is only God himself. So the Tselem Elokim is what? Is intellect, and due to that, you have the ability to behave as an independent person, independent being. Like God is independent, the human being is independent. And we are the initiators of whatever our lives are about, we have a say in it. We have a degree of input continuously. That itself is a godly profile. So if you actually exercise that, where you do the right thing, because you exercise your choice, as God always does the right thing, then you're reflecting God's image of what? Of choice. But God, of course, doesn't have a choice, because God sees everything with absoluteness. Therefore, you're reflecting the Tzelem Elokim. And that is a basis to be able to cleave to him. That's the concept. So if the nations of the world, they cross those lines, adultery, incest, that means they did not exercise that Tzelem Elokim, the characteristic that man was endowed with. They didn't exercise that. So the basis for their illegitimacy is because exactly to demonstrate they're not who they were supposed to be. Klal Yisrael are the only ones who had that pure pedigree. As a result of that, as it says, the only woman who ever was defiled in Egypt in a 210-year period was Shlomo Bas Divri, and she brought upon herself. It's unheard of. You have millions of Jews. They murdered them, they tortured them, they killed them, they enslaved them. The women, not one was defiled except that one who brought upon herself. That confirms that in terms of their essence, in terms of exercise and choice, which were normally inclined or drawn to, they were able to what? To control that. Therefore, that's godliness. That's being spiritual. Therefore, only the mishpachos, only the families that had the pure pedigree, do they have relevance to the Shekhinah, and therefore they're the only ones who are eligible for conscription. Good.
What about Dinah? What about Dinah? Wasn't she raped?
Okay. Why was she raped?
She put herself in that predicament.
No. Shlomo Bas Divri, she used to speak to the men. Dino allowed herself to be exposed, to be seen.
Okay.
That's the difference. Here, this woman, she was a dabronis. Dabronis means she used to, she would meet the Egyptian, good morning, whatever the names were. So because she had this level of social interaction with the men, therefore she was noticed by them, and as a result of that, this is what happened.
Rabbi, at the end of Pinchas, there's another counting before they go into the land, and you mentioned in the past, Chazal said that a yud and a hey are added to the different tribes.
Good.
To document the pedigree.
Yes, good. We spoke about this.
So my question is, why isn't it prior to Sinai? After Egypt, 210 years, you would have thought that's the time you had to prove the pedigree. Because in the desert, they were pretty isolated. I mean, they were within themselves. They weren't exposed so much, except for the whole thing with Pinchas and the Baal Peor and all that stuff. But in terms of the 210 years in Egypt, okay, so why wasn't the Yud Nehei added prior to Sinai?
Okay. Could you imagine, this is a little bit of a joke, Einstein's theory of relativity, and Alan, as a doctor, although he's not a physicist, he goes and he presents at a physicist convention Einstein's theory of relativity in his own name. They think, oh, this man's unbelievable. All of a sudden, Einstein walks in, and he hears his theory being mentioned. Okay? As I said, when Alan quotes, he quotes correctly, but not accurately. Okay? I discuss this every year almost, this question, which Alan is bringing up. Okay?
That's why I keep coming back every day.
Exactly. Baruch Hashem. Okay. The question, I'll take, wait. I just want to say the way I ask the question always. Alan's asking it, but it's the same question. I just ask it this way. We find, first I want to finish up the Midrash. The Midrash says, God says, because you people are illegitimate, you weren't qualified. So when it came to the Baal Peor, and the Jews crossed those lines, so now the nations of the world said, they just become disqualified. So why they continue to be your people if they're violating this area? If you can only maintain that relationship, if you have that purity, then they're better than we are. So on that, Hashem says, anybody who engaged with the Midianite women, they died in the plague. So God weeded out all the impurity, so my people are pure. That was Hashem's response to the nations of the world. There were 40,000 people who died in that plague. Anyone had any relevance to that was immediately, they were actually taken out to maintain that purity. There's a Ramban, the Ramban writes, during Bayis Sheni, there were no longer revealed miracles. There was one revealed miracle. What was that? That if, God forbid, a woman was forewarned by her husband not to sequester herself with another man, and she defied his warning, and it's questioned whether she committed adultery. So we have the ritual of the Sota, that will prove whether she committed adultery or not. What happened if she was guilty? What would happen to her? She would immediately start swelling, bloating, to the point that all her arteries would burst, and she literally, physically, she'd become dismembered. And that is a confirmation that she's an adulteress, and says, Chol Yisrael Yishmu V'yiro. And all Jews will see, they will hear and see, and therefore this will cause them to understand the seriousness of, God forbid, committing adultery. That was a miracle. Because it says if she didn't, if her health was, let's say, she had poor health, it would increase. She had difficult giving birth, she would not. If she had ugly children, they would be beautiful. But on the other side, if God forbid, chas v'sholom, she committed adultery, it'd be disastrous. It was a miracle. So the Ramban writes, because when it comes to the pedigree of Klal Yisrael, to maintain the purity, God will not tolerate this, and he wants it to be known that the Jews are pure. Therefore, even though we weren't worthy of a miracle during Bayis Sheni, revealed miracles, this one revealed miracle remained to show what it means, what the pedigree of the Jewish people means, the purity of that pedigree. Okay.
You didn't answer my question, Rabbi.
Which question did I answer?